A dog's last wish before being put down was to hug a kitten, but when it happened, the vet burst into tears because he realized the truth no one expected. This wasn't just a sad goodbye. It was a desperate signal, a hidden message from a past no one wanted uncovered. The condemned dog wasn't what he seemed, and the fragile kitten carried a secret that could expose everything. What dark forces wanted the dog silenced forever? What shocking connection could bring even a hardened vet to his knees? And when the truth finally comes out, will it save lives or destroy them? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Greer Hollis stared at the intake paperwork, her heart heavy in her chest. The county order felt like lead in her hands, another dangerous dog marked for euthanasia. But something didn't add up. The senior mixed breed sitting quietly in the holding kennel didn't match the aggressive profile detailed in the report. Scout, as his paperwork named him, had graying around his muzzle and old burn scars visible through his patchy fur. His brown eyes watched her steadily, showing none of the anxiety or aggression she typically saw in truly dangerous cases. A slight limp marked his movements, evidence of an old injury that had healed improperly. "I'm so sorry, buddy," Greer whispered, crouching down to his level. Her scrubs rustled as she shifted, and she pushed back a strand of hair that had escaped her practical ponytail. After 12 hours on her feet, fatigue pulled at her bones, but this case wouldn't let her rest. As she reached for Scout's lead, her hands trembled slightly. These were the moments she hated most about her job, when protocol demanded actions her heart couldn't justify. Scout stood calmly as she clipped the leash, his tail giving a gentle wag. "Let's get this over with," she murmured, more to herself than the dog. But as they started down the sterile corridor toward the exam room, Scout suddenly tensed. Before Greer could tighten her grip, he slipped free of the lead with surprising agility for his age. "Scout! Wait!" Greer called out, her voice echoing off the clinical walls. But instead of running for freedom, Scout padded purposefully down the hallway, his nails clicking against the linoleum floor. He moved with intent, as if drawn by something specific. Greer hurried after him, her heart pounding. If a dangerous dog got loose in the clinic, Dr. Kincaid would have her head. But Scout wasn't acting aggressive. If anything, his body language was gentle, almost protective. He stopped outside the recovery ward, where they kept animals healing from procedures. Through the observation window, Greer could see a tiny calico kitten curled in one of the cages, still fragile from a bout of pneumonia. The kitten was trembling, either from lingering fever or fear. Before Greer could reach for Scout's collar, he nosed open the ward door and slipped inside. She held her breath, expecting the worst. But what happened next stopped her in her tracks. Scout approached the kitten's cage with extraordinary gentleness. The little calico looked up, but showed no fear. With careful movements, Scout lay down beside the cage, curling his body protectively around it. He tucked his chin down and began taking slow, measured breaths, almost like he was demonstrating proper breathing for the sick kitten. The sound of rapid footsteps interrupted the moment. Dr. Silas Kincaid burst through the door, his lean frame tense with alarm. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice sharp with authority. "That dog is scheduled for—" But the words died in his throat as he took in the scene before him. All the color drained from his face as he watched Scout's rhythmic breathing, the way the dog had positioned himself beside the kitten's cage. His hands began to shake. "That breathing pattern," he whispered, more to himself than to Greer. "It's impossible." Greer watched in confusion as her normally stern boss seemed to crumple in on himself, aging years in moments. "Dr. Kincaid?" "What's wrong?" "That cadence," he said hoarsely. "I taught it to my daughter, Tamsin. She used it with her rescue animals, a specific pattern to help calm them. 4 counts in, hold for 7, 8 counts out. I've never seen another handler use it." The mention of his daughter made Greer's ears perk up. Everyone knew about Dr. Kincaid's estrangement from his only child, though the details were shrouded in whispered speculation. She'd never heard him speak of Tamsin directly before. "We should scan them both," Greer suggested quickly, seizing the moment of uncertainty. "Standard protocol for all intakes, right?" She was already reaching for the handheld scanner, determined to buy Scout more time. Dr. Kincaid gave a distracted nod, still staring at Scout as if seeing a ghost. Greer started with the kitten, running the scanner over its tiny body. The machine beeped, and she felt her own breath catch as she read the display. "Dr. Kincaid," she said carefully. "The kitten's alternate emergency contact. It's Tamsin, your daughter." The veterinarian staggered slightly, catching himself against the doorframe. Scout lifted his head at the movement, and Greer saw something she never expected: recognition in the dog's eyes as he looked at Dr. Kincaid. "This can't be coincidence," Greer pressed, sensing an opportunity to save Scout's life. "The breathing pattern, the microchip. Something's not right about this euthanasia order. We need to investigate before we proceed." Dr. Kincaid ran a hand over his face, the deep lines of stress more prominent than ever. "The county won't wait," he warned. "They'll demand action within hours. Policy is clear on dangerous dog cases." "Then we'll stall them," Greer insisted, straightening her spine. "I can list every procedural requirement in the manual. Missing signatures, incomplete documentation, verification of identity. I'll find something to buy us time." She met her boss's tired eyes with determination. "Look at him, Dr. Kincaid. Does that look like a dangerous dog to you?" As if to emphasize her point, Scout gently nudged the kitten's cage with his nose. The calico had stopped trembling and was now purring. One tiny paw reached out toward its unlikely protector. Dr. Kincaid's professional mask cracked further as he watched the interaction. "Hold him," he finally ordered, his voice rough with emotion. "Pending verification of the county order. But Greer—" He fixed her with a serious look. "The county won't like delays. Be prepared for pushback." "I understand," she replied firmly. "I'll start the paperwork now. Every I dotted, every T crossed. They'll have to go through it all properly." As she turned to leave, she saw Dr. Kincaid sink into a chair, his eyes fixed on Scout and the kitten. The dog had resumed his calming breathing pattern, a living link to his estranged daughter that had appeared at exactly the right moment. Greer hurried to her station, determination fueling her tired body. She had forms to fill out, procedures to triple-check, and a life to save. Something bigger was at play here. She could feel it in her bones. And she wasn't about to let an innocent dog die because of bureaucratic momentum. Behind her, Scout maintained his gentle vigil over the kitten, his presence a quiet testament to the healing power of compassion. And perhaps a bridge between a father and daughter who had lost their way back to each other. The front door of Sunrise Valley Veterinary Clinic burst open with a sharp bang that made everyone jump. County Director Lowell Pierce strode in, his polished shoes clicking against the linoleum floor. His face was red with frustration, and he clutched a stack of papers in his hand like a weapon. "Where is that dangerous animal?" Pierce demanded, scanning the room with narrowed eyes. "The Vale case needs immediate resolution." Greer felt her heart race, but kept her voice steady. "Sir, we're reviewing the case file before proceeding. Standard protocol requires --" "Protocol?" Pierce cut her off with a bark of laughter. "We have 3 separate bite reports." "This isn't a debate, Ms. Hollis." The phone at the front desk started ringing, its shrill tone cutting through the tension. The receptionist answered it, her face growing pale as she listened. "Dr. Kincaid!" she called out. "It's Mrs. Vale. She's quite insistent about speaking with you." Silas emerged from his office, his shoulders tense. He took the phone, and even from across the room, Loretta Vale's sharp voice carried clearly. "That beast mauled my son!" Vale's voice crackled through the receiver. "I demand immediate action. Do you understand what that monster did to my Timothy? He'll need plastic surgery." Greer watched Silas's face carefully. Something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, perhaps even recognition. He pressed the phone closer to his ear. Mrs. Vale, I understand your concern, but we have procedures. Procedures? Vale's laugh was cold. Need I remind you how much your clinic depends on donations from families like mine? That dog dies today, or I'll ensure the county board reviews your operating license. Greer stepped forward, her voice quiet but firm. Dr. Kincaid, please, let me review the medical file first. Something isn't adding up here. Pierce opened his mouth to object, but Silas held up a hand. The internal struggle was visible on his face, years of playing it safe warring with a nagging sense that something was wrong. Finally, he nodded. You have 30 minutes, Greer. Not a second more. She didn't waste any time. While Pierce paced the lobby and the phone continued to ring with more calls from Vale's influential friends, Greer dove into Scout's intake photos. The big dog watched her from his kennel, his eyes calm and steady. First, she noticed the burn scars along his flank. Old ones, mostly hidden by fur but visible when you knew where to look. Then there was the slight awkwardness in his gait, evidence of a healed leg break. Both injuries, according to the dates in his file, occurred during a barn fire at Vale Kennels 6 months ago. The official report listed it as accidental. Greer's hands shook as she dug deeper. The timing nagged at her. Those injuries happened just weeks before Scout was suddenly labeled as dangerous. The first bite report was filed the day after the fire. She glanced at the tiny calico kitten, still recovering in the oxygen chamber nearby. On instinct, she moved the portable unit closer to Scout's kennel, but not so close as to risk any interaction that could be labeled as aggressive. The big dog's tail wagged gently at the sight of his little friend. The lobby was getting crowded now. Pierce was on his phone, speaking in harsh whispers about liability and donor relations. The receptionist looked overwhelmed as calls continued to pour in, all prominent community members expressing their concern about the dangerous dog. Time's almost up, Pierce announced, checking his watch. The Vale family has influence with the state veterinary board. We can't risk... Look at these dates, Greer interrupted, spreading out the photos and reports on the counter. Scout's injuries from the barn fire, the sudden behavior change, the timing of the first bite report. None of this strikes you as suspicious? Silas leaned in, his brow furrowed. The fire was ruled accidental. Mrs. Vale's insurance report was quite clear. Insurance reports can be manipulated, Greer pressed. And look at how these burns are positioned. They're defensive wounds, Dr. Kincaid, like he was protecting something, or someone. Pierce slapped his hand on the counter. This is ridiculous. We have signed statements about the animal's aggressive behavior. Multiple witnesses, all connected to the Vale family. Greer pointed out. And no actual medical documentation of Timothy Vale's supposed injuries. Just incident reports filed after the fact. The phone rang again. This time, when the receptionist answered, her eyes went wide. Dr. Kincaid, it's your daughter, Tamsin. The room fell silent. Silas stared at the phone like it might bite him. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for it. But before he could take it, Loretta Vale herself burst through the front door. She was perfectly coiffed despite the early hour, her designer outfit immaculate. But there was something wild in her eyes as they locked onto Scout's kennel. This ends now, she declared. That animal is a menace. Think of the children he could harm next, my poor Timothy. Where is Timothy, Mrs. Vale? Greer asked quietly. If his injuries are so severe, why hasn't he been treated at any local hospital? Vale's perfectly painted lips tightened. We took him to a private specialist. Without filing an insurance claim? Without any medical documentation at all? Greer pressed. And why did you wait until after the barn fire to report any aggressive behavior? How dare you question me? Vale's voice rose to a shriek. Do you know who I am? What I could do to this clinic. But Greer wasn't backing down. She held up the intake photos, pointing to Scout's old injuries. These scars tell a story, Mrs. Vale, and I don't think it's the story you've been telling. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Pierce kept checking his phone nervously. Vale's face had gone from red to white. And Silas was looking at Scout with new eyes, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "Director Pierce," Greer said firmly, "I formally request a stay of euthanasia pending a full investigation into these inconsistencies. There's enough evidence here to justify—" "Evidence?" Vale laughed, but there was an edge of hysteria to it. "You have nothing but speculation and an emotional attachment to a dangerous animal. Director Pierce, I insist you enforce the county order immediately." Pierce fidgeted with his tie. The Vale family's concerns must be taken seriously. Their contributions to the county's animal welfare programs? "Their contributions don't override the truth," Greer interrupted. She turned to Silas, her eyes pleading. "Dr. Kincaid, you see it too, don't you? The timing, the injuries, the lack of documentation. Something happened in that barn fire, something Mrs. Vale doesn't want anyone to know about." Vale's composure cracked further. "You're just a veterinary technician. You have no authority." "She has more authority than you might think," Silas said quietly. He was still staring at Scout, at the way the big dog remained calm despite the chaos around him. "And she has the right to question inconsistencies in medical records." "Silas," Vale's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, "think very carefully about what you're doing. One word from me to the board—" "Would reveal what, exactly?" Greer pressed. "What really happened in that barn, Mrs. Vale? What was Scout protecting? Or who?" The phone was still ringing. Tamsin's call still waiting. Scout watched them all with those steady eyes, and beside him, the tiny kitten mewed softly in its oxygen chamber. Two pieces of a puzzle that was starting to take shape. Vale's perfectly manicured hands clenched into fists. "Director Pierce, I want that dog euthanized now. This instant, or I'll—" "You'll what?" Silas asked softly. "Tell everyone what really happened 6 months ago? About the fire that wasn't so accidental after all?" The color drained completely from Vale's face. She took a step backward, then another. "You can't prove anything." "Maybe not yet," Greer agreed. "But these records, these injuries, they're enough to justify a formal investigation. And once that starts, who knows what we'll find?" Pierce looked between Vale and Silas, clearly torn between political expediency and growing doubt. Perhaps a brief delay would be prudent, to ensure all procedures were properly followed. "This is outrageous!" Vale spun on her heel, heading for the door. "You'll regret this, all of you." But her threat lacked its earlier force. As she yanked the door open, her hand was shaking. Greer let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. It wasn't a victory, not yet. But it was time. Time to dig deeper, to uncover what really happened in that barn. Time to find out why Vale was so desperate to silence Scout forever. The phone kept ringing, Tamsin's call still waiting. And in his kennel, Scout settled down next to the oxygen chamber, his protective instinct evident in every line of his body. Whatever secrets lay buried in his scars, Greer was now certain of one thing. This dog wasn't dangerous. He was a hero. And somewhere in the story of that barn fire lay the truth that could save him. After Vale's dramatic exit, the clinic settled into an uneasy quiet. Greer sat at the reception computer, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she pulled up years of vaccination records. Beside her, Silas leaned in, his reading glasses perched on his nose as they combed through file after file. "Here," Greer said, pointing to a series of entries. "Look at these vaccination certificates from Vale's kennels. The dates seem odd." Silas squinted at the screen. "That bulk discount program. I remember approving it about 3 years ago. Vale said she needed multiple certificates for her show dogs. But look at the serial numbers." Greer traced her finger across several entries. "They're sequential, but the dates jump around. And these stamps." She enlarged one of the scanned documents. "The ink pattern is identical on multiple certificates, down to this tiny smudge in the corner." Silas's face went pale. He pulled off his glasses, rubbing his temples. They've been copying my stamp, using the same certificate over and over, just changing the dates and dog information. Which means, Greer started, which means some of those dogs might never have been vaccinated at all. Silas's voice was barely above a whisper. They've been using my credentials to create a paper trail that looks legitimate. Greer opened another file. And look at these billing records. The numbers don't add up. There are charges for vaccines that weren't actually purchased from our suppliers. As they dug deeper, the pattern became clearer. Vale's Kennels had been using Silas's professional reputation to cover their tracks, creating false documentation that made their operation appear above board while cutting corners that put animals at risk. "I've been such a fool," Silas muttered, slumping in his chair. "So worried about maintaining professional relationships, about keeping the peace. I let them use me." "It's not too late to make it right," Greer said softly. "Scout needs us. And I bet he's not the only one." Silas straightened up, a new determination in his eyes. "You're right. No more playing it safe. We need help, though. Someone who knows the adoption side of things." "Maribel," they said in unison. Maribel Dunn arrived 15 minutes later, her familiar warm presence bringing a sense of calm to the tense atmosphere. She'd always had a soft spot for Scout, often sitting with him between adoption events, sharing her lunch and telling him stories. "I knew something wasn't right," Maribel said as they showed her their findings. "Scout's always been gentle with the other animals. Even when new dogs would bark or snap at him, he'd just walk away. That's not the behavior of an aggressive dog." They spread their evidence across the break room table, the falsified vaccine records, the photographs of Scout's old injuries, the irregular paperwork from Vale's Kennels. Maribel added her own observations from Scout's time in the adoption program, detailed notes about his temperament, his protective instincts towards smaller animals, his calm demeanor around children. "And now this," Greer said, pulling up the kitten's microchip information. "The chip is registered to Tamsin, Dr. Kincaid's daughter, the same Tamsin who disappeared after the barn fire at Vale's property. This can't be a coincidence." Silas stared at the screen, his hands trembling slightly. "Tamsin always said Vale was hiding something. I didn't listen. I told her not to make waves, to think about her future in veterinary medicine." "We're listening now," Greer said firmly. "And we're going to make this right." They worked together, assembling their challenge to the euthanasia order. Maribel's detailed behavior logs showed a pattern of gentle interactions completely at odds with Vale's claims of aggression. The photographs of Scout's injuries told a story of past trauma, not violence, defensive wounds rather than attack patterns. "Look at this scar pattern," Greer pointed out. "These burns wrap around his side, like he was shielding something or someone from the fire. And this healed break in his leg? The X-rays show it was a clean snap, consistent with falling through weakened floorboards, not an attack scenario." Silas nodded, adding his professional analysis to their documentation. "The injury patterns are completely inconsistent with Vale's claim that Scout attacked her son. These are defensive wounds, not offensive injuries." They organized their evidence meticulously. Medical records, behavioral documentation, the irregular paperwork trail from Vale's Kennels, and the surprising connection through the kitten's microchip. By early afternoon, they had assembled a comprehensive challenge to the euthanasia order. "Time to call Pierce," Silas said grimly, reaching for the phone. The county director arrived 30 minutes later, his usual bureaucratic composure slightly frayed. They presented their findings in the conference room, laying out the evidence piece by piece. "This is very irregular," Pierce muttered, flipping through their documentation. "The Vale family has been a major donor to county programs for decades. These allegations are supported by evidence," Greer interrupted firmly. "Evidence that suggests not only wrongful accusations against Scout, but a pattern of fraudulent practices at Vale's Kennels. We're requesting an immediate hold on the euthanasia order," Silas added, his voice carrying the full weight of his professional authority. And chain of custody protection for both Scout and the kitten. They're key evidence in what appears to be a much larger issue. Pierce wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. Do you understand what you're asking? The potential fallout. If these allegations prove false, the legal exposure alone. And if they're true? Maribel asked quietly. What's the exposure if we euthanize an innocent dog who might be the key to uncovering serious abuse? Pierce looked between them, then down at the documents again. Finally, he pulled out his phone and made a call. This is Director Pierce. I'm issuing a temporary hold on case number 47,293, pending review of new evidence. Yes, the Vale case. And I need chain of custody protection implemented for both animals involved. He paused, listening. Yes, I understand the implications. Do it anyway. He hung up and fixed them with a stern look. You have 48 hours. After that, if you can't prove these allegations, he left the threat hanging. We understand, Silas said firmly. And Director Pierce? Thank you. After Pierce left, the three of them stood in silence for a moment, the weight of what they'd undertaken settling over them. Then Greer spoke up. We should check on Scout and the kitten. They found Scout exactly where they'd left him, lying protectively near the oxygen chamber where the little calico kitten rested. He thumped his tail at their approach, his eyes wise and patient. Silas knelt down beside the kennel, reaching through the bars to gently touch Scout's graying muzzle. I'm sorry it took me so long to see the truth, old friend. But we're going to make this right, I promise. Scout leaned into his touch, and for a moment Silas could almost see his daughter Tamsin kneeling beside him, her heart full of the same compassion that had driven her to stand up against Vale's cruelty. He'd failed to stand with her then, but he wouldn't fail these animals now. The kitten mewed softly from its chamber, and Scout's ears perked up immediately. Greer smiled at their interaction. He's not a dangerous dog at all, is he? He's a protector. Always has been. Yes, Silas agreed, watching Scout's gentle vigilance. And now it's our turn to protect him. Maribel checked her watch. 48 hours, we'd better make them count. They gathered around the break room table again, spreading out their evidence and beginning to dig deeper. Somewhere in these records, in Scout's scars and the kitten's mysterious appearance, lay the truth about what happened in Vale's barn that night. And this time, that truth would come to light. The afternoon sun slanted through the clinic windows as they worked, casting long shadows across their scattered papers and determined faces. Scout's occasional soft woofs and the kitten's gentle purring provided a soundtrack to their investigation. They had 2 days to uncover what Vale had worked so hard to hide, 2 days to save an innocent dog and maybe expose a cruel system that had gone unchecked for far too long. The evening shadows lengthened across the clinic floor as Greer finished her final rounds. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving only the night crew to monitor the recovering patients. The quiet was almost peaceful, broken only by the gentle hum of medical equipment and occasional soft animal sounds. Greer paused by Scout's enclosure, smiling as she watched him keeping his faithful vigil near the oxygen chamber where the calico kitten rested. His eyes followed her movements, alert but calm. She'd gotten permission to move him closer to monitor both animals more easily, and his presence seemed to comfort the tiny feline patient. Just checking your friend one more time, she told Scout softly, approaching the oxygen chamber. The kitten's breathing had improved significantly, though they were maintaining the supplemental oxygen as a precaution. Scout's tail thumped gently against the floor as she performed her checks. The first hint that something was wrong came as a subtle change in air pressure, a whisper of cold draft where there shouldn't be one. Scout's ears pricked forward, his body tensing slightly. Greer was just turning toward the door when she heard it, the distinct sound of the back entrance being forced. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor, purposeful and threatening. Scout rose to his feet, a low rumble building in his chest. Before Greer could reach for her phone, a large figure appeared in the doorway. Rafe Dawn, Vale's enforcer, his face set in grim determination. "Step aside," he ordered, his voice rough. "This doesn't have to get messy." Greer's heart hammered, but she held her ground. "You can't be in here. This is a restricted area." Rafe's response was to move swiftly to the oxygen lines feeding into the chamber. With practiced efficiency, he pulled out a knife and slashed through the tubing. The hiss of escaping oxygen filled the room as alarms began to blare. "No!" Greer lunged forward, but Rafe was already yanking the kitten's crate free from its connections. The small creature inside mewed in distress. "Vale's property," he growled, moving toward the exit. "Should have stayed out of it." Greer blocked his path, knowing she was no match for his size, but unable to let him take the kitten. "That animal is under protective custody. You're committing a crime." Rafe's face darkened. He shifted the crate to one hand and swung the other toward Greer. But before the blow could land, Scout moved with surprising speed, inserting himself between them. The impact meant for Greer struck his shoulder instead, but he didn't attack. He simply stood firm, a living shield. In that moment of chaos, something clicked in Greer's mind. Words she'd heard Silas mutter during their investigation, an old training command. Without thinking, she called out firmly, "Anchor!" The effect was immediate. Scout's posture shifted subtly but significantly. His aggressive rumble ceased, replaced by controlled, steady breathing. He remained protectively positioned, but showed no signs of lunging or attacking, exactly as a well-trained service dog would respond. Rafe faltered, clearly thrown by Scout's disciplined response. This wasn't the actions of an aggressive, uncontrolled animal. This was precise, trained behavior. Taking advantage of his hesitation, Greer reached for the crate. Rafe yanked it away and shoved past them both, heading for the loading bay. In his haste, something fell from his pocket, a key fob that clattered across the floor. "Damn it," he cursed, but didn't stop to retrieve it. "Vale's gonna have my hide if we're not cleared out by Thursday's inspection." The words echoed behind him as he disappeared through the door, taking the frightened kitten with him. Greer started to follow, but Scout's gentle pressure against her legs held her back, protecting her from rushing into danger. The commotion had drawn attention. Silas burst into the room, taking in the scene with one swift glance. The slashed oxygen lines, the missing kitten, Scout's protective stance beside Greer. "Are you all right?" he demanded, already moving to secure the damaged lines. Greer nodded, still shaking slightly. "Scout, he protected me. When I used that command, anchor, he responded perfectly, like he'd been trained for it." "Because he was," Silas said grimly, his hands working quickly to stop the oxygen leak. That was one of Tamsin's training commands. A dog with uncontrollable aggression wouldn't respond like that. This proves what we suspected. He finished securing the lines and stood, his face set with determination. "This isn't just harassment anymore. This is evidence theft and criminal endangerment. We need to document everything." Moving with purposeful efficiency, Silas began logging the break-in, photographing the damage, and collecting evidence. He picked up the dropped key fob, examining it carefully before sealing it in an evidence bag. Rafe mentioned Thursday's inspection. Greer said, gently stroking Scout's head to calm her own nerves. "They're planning to move animals somewhere." "And now we have proof of their desperation," Silas replied, his voice hard with resolve. "This goes beyond clinic walls now. We need to contact law enforcement and the State Veterinary Board immediately." Scout remained close to Greer as they documented the scene, his behavior a stark contrast to his supposed dangerous nature. Every few minutes he would look toward the door where Rafe had taken the kitten, whining softly. "We'll get the kitten back," Greer promised him, kneeling to wrap her arms around his solid frame. "You did so good, boy. You showed everyone exactly who you really are." Silas watched them, his expression both proud and pained. Scout was never the danger. He was trying to protect someone the night of that fire, wasn't he? Just like he protected you tonight. As they worked to secure the clinic and preserve evidence, the gravity of what had just happened settled over them. Vale's desperate attempt to retrieve the kitten had backfired spectacularly, providing them with both physical evidence and witness testimony of criminal behavior. More importantly, Scout's controlled, protective response had definitively discredited the uncontrolled aggression label that had nearly cost him his life. The night crew helped them stabilize the oxygen systems and check on the other patients while they waited for the authorities to arrive. Scout stayed close to Greer, his presence both comforting and symbolic of everything they were fighting for: the truth about Vale's operation, justice for the animals in her care, and the vindication of those who had tried to expose her before. Looking at Scout's gentle vigilance, Greer could finally see the full picture forming. He wasn't just any rescue dog. He was living proof of Vale's deception, trained with commands that linked him directly to Tamsin's work. His protective instincts weren't a danger. They were his purpose, one he'd demonstrated perfectly tonight. Silas worked methodically, his movements precise, but tension evident in every line of his body. This attack on his clinic, the endangerment of patients in his care, it had crossed a line that his professional caution could no longer ignore. As he documented each piece of evidence, his resolve visibly strengthened. The security cameras had caught everything, providing clear footage of Rafe's break-in and theft. Combined with the physical evidence, the key fob, and Rafe's inadvertent admission about Vale's plans, they finally had concrete proof of wrongdoing that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. As Silas finished documenting the break-in damage, his phone suddenly pinged with an alert. He pulled it from his pocket, frowning at the screen. The color drained from his face. "What is it?" Greer asked, moving closer with Scout at her side. It's a microchip update," Silas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Registered to Tamsin. She's alive." His hands trembled as he showed Greer the screen. There, in black and white, was proof that his daughter was not only alive, but actively working behind the scenes. The update included a secure messaging system linked to the chip, a breadcrumb trail she had deliberately left for them to find. "She's been orchestrating this whole thing," Silas continued, scrolling through the encrypted message. "The kitten wasn't a coincidence. Tamsin planted it here as a witness, knowing we'd scanned the chip. She's been working off the grid since she tried to expose Vale's operation." Greer sank into a nearby chair, Scout immediately pressing against her legs in support. "That's why Vale was so desperate to get the kitten back." "It's not just about the chip. That kitten must have seen something at the estate." "And Scout," Silas ran a hand over his face, decades of guilt weighing heavily in his expression. "The bite incident. It wasn't random aggression at all, was it? He was protecting Tamsin." The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. Scout's trained responses, his protective nature, the old injuries that lined up with the barn fire, it all pointed to a much bigger story than they'd initially realized. Maribel arrived at the clinic, having rushed over after hearing about the break-in. Her practical nature took in the situation quickly. "We can't wait for official channels," she said firmly. "Vale knows we're onto something. She'll move or destroy evidence before any investigation can start." Silas paced the room, his professional caution warring with parental anguish. "I failed Tamsin once," he said quietly. "When she came to me with concerns about Vale's operation, I chose to protect the clinic's reputation instead of supporting my own daughter. I won't make that mistake again." Greer stood, determination straightening her spine. "Then we don't wait. We have evidence of criminal behavior, documented proof of falsified records, and now this connection to Tamsin. We need to act before Vale can cover her tracks." Maribel pulled out her phone. "I know someone who might help. Deputy Sarah Chen. She's been suspicious of Vale's operation for months, but never had enough evidence to act on it. She'd be willing to observe any lawful seizure if we can present reasonable cause." They gathered around Maribel's desk, mapping out a plan. The risk was significant, but the moral imperative was clear. Vale's horse estate sprawled over 50 acres, with multiple outbuildings and kennels. They would need to document everything meticulously to prevent any possibility of a cover-up. "We'll need cameras," Greer said, already making a list. Multiple angles, live streaming if possible. Vale has too many connections. We can't risk any evidence disappearing. Silas nodded, his professional demeanor returning as they formulated their strategy. I'll contact Deputy Chen. We'll do this by the book, but we'll do it now. Tonight. Scout watched them intently, as if understanding the gravity of their planning. His presence served as a constant reminder of what was at stake. Not just his life or the kitten's safety, but justice for all the animals in Vale's care and vindication for Tamsin's original whistleblowing efforts. Maribel made the call to Deputy Chen, speaking in careful, measured terms about their evidence and concerns. After a few minutes, she gave them a thumbs up. She's willing to meet us near the estate in an hour. She can't participate directly without a warrant, but she'll observe and document anything we find in plain sight. Greer gathered their evidence into a secure folder. Photos of Scout's injuries, the falsified vaccine certificates, security footage of the break-in, and now the microchip data linking everything back to Tamsin. Years of deception were finally unraveling, pulled apart by a single thread of truth that had started with a supposedly dangerous dog and a mysteriously placed kitten. Silas held his phone, staring at Tamsin's message. His daughter had never given up fighting for what was right. She'd gone underground, carefully laying a trail of evidence that would be impossible to ignore once discovered. The kitten was her messenger, Scout her witness, and now it was time for Silas to step up and finish what she had started. "We should bring Scout," Greer suggested softly. "Not just because he deserves to see this through, but because his training might help us navigate the estate. He knows the place, knows where things are hidden." The large dog's ears perked up at his name, and he moved to stand beside her, ready as always to protect and serve. His calm, steady presence seemed to ground them all, a living reminder of loyalty and perseverance in the face of injustice. They gathered their equipment quickly but thoroughly, cameras, documents, first aid supplies in case they found animals in distress. Maribel coordinated with her shelter contacts, ensuring they would have support ready if they discovered animals needing immediate care. Vale's estate is just outside county lines, Silas explained, spreading out a map. That's part of why she's gotten away with so much for so long, jurisdictional confusion. But Deputy Chen has authority there, and with our documentation and her observation, Vale won't be able to sweep this under the rug. As they made final preparations to leave, Greer knelt beside Scout, looking into his wise brown eyes. "We're going to make this right," she promised him. "For you, for the kitten, for Tamsin, for all of them." Scout pressed his forehead against hers in silent understanding. He had waited patiently for this moment, trusting that truth would eventually prevail. Now, with the team assembled and evidence in hand, they were ready to confront Vale and expose the full scope of her operation. Silas watched them, his heart heavy with regret, but lifted by purpose. His daughter had never stopped fighting for justice. She had trusted that someday someone would follow her carefully laid trail of evidence and finish what she had started. Now, thanks to Scout's protective nature and Greer's unwavering determination, they had that chance. The night stretched ahead of them, full of risk and possibility. But the path was clear, even if it wasn't easy. They would document everything, protect the evidence, and finally bring Vale's cruel practices into the light where they couldn't be ignored or explained away. As they loaded the last of their supplies into their vehicles, the weight of their mission settled over them. This wasn't just about saving one dog or finding one kitten anymore. This was about exposing years of systematic abuse and corruption, about righting wrongs that had been ignored for too long. Maribel finished her final call to Deputy Chen, confirming their meeting point. "She's already in position," she reported. "Says there's unusual activity at the estate, lots of vehicles moving in and out." "They're trying to clear evidence," Silas said grimly. "But they can't move everything." "Not with what we already have documented." The revelation of Tamsin's involvement had transformed their mission from a local animal welfare concern into something much more significant. This was about vindication, justice, and the courage to stand up against powerful interests that had long operated in the shadows, The evening air hung heavy with anticipation as Greer, Silas, Marable, and Deputy Sarah Collins gathered in the clinic's back parking lot. Streetlights cast long shadows across their determined faces while they reviewed their carefully crafted plan one final time. "Let's go over everyone's roles again," Greer said, her voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through her. She adjusted her veterinary kit, packed with essential supplies for handling distressed animals. "I'll take point on any animal interactions we encounter. The priority is keeping them calm and safe." Silas held up his camera, its memory card fresh and battery fully charged. "I'll document everything. Serial numbers, labels, conditions, timestamps. We need an airtight chain of evidence." His weathered features were set with determination, years of professional caution now transformed into meticulous purpose. Maribel pulled out her phone, double-checking her live streaming setup. "I've got the broadcast ready to go. My shelter followers will tune in fast once we're live. No editorializing, just the facts as we find them." She'd chosen a simple black sweater and dark pants, practical for their mission while looking professional on camera. Deputy Collins nodded, her badge catching the light. "I'm here to observe and ensure everything stays within legal bounds. Remember, we can only enter areas that are reasonably accessible to authorized personnel. No forced entry." The drive to Vale's estate took 20 minutes, each passing mile ratcheting up the tension. They parked their vehicles discreetly along the service road that led to the barn complex. The main house sat dark and quiet atop the hill, while warm light spilled from beneath the barn doors. "Security cameras," Greer whispered as they approached. "None that I can see," Deputy Collins replied. "These are working buildings, too much daily traffic for tight surveillance." Maribel positioned herself with her phone, getting the right angle. "Going live in 3, 2, 1. She tapped the screen. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Maribel Dunn from Happy Tales Shelter, currently at Vale Kennels with Dr. Kincaid and our team to investigate concerns about animal welfare and documentation irregularities." They entered through the main barn door, moving with purpose but without rushing. The familiar sounds and smells of an active kennel operation filled the air. The soft whining of dogs, the rustle of bedding, the sharp tang of cleaning products. Greer immediately noticed something off about the atmosphere. The dogs weren't showing the usual excitement at seeing visitors. Many seemed subdued, almost lethargic. "Dr. Kincaid!" she called softly, pointing to a medical cart partially hidden behind some crates. "Look at this." Silas moved in with his camera, methodically photographing the bottles of sedatives arranged on the cart. "These are prescription medications," he said, voice tight with controlled anger. "Far more than any legitimate operation would need." The barn complex sprawled through several connected buildings. They moved carefully through each section, documenting everything they found. In one wing, they discovered rows of puppy pens, but something wasn't right. "No identification tags," Deputy Collins noted, shining her flashlight along the kennels. "Every legitimate breeding operation has to maintain proper records for each animal." Silas photographed each pen, capturing the missing documentation. "And look at these dates on the feeding charts. They don't match the ages of these pups. These records have been falsified." A mechanical humming drew their attention to a small office area. Through the window, they could see a paper shredder running, stacks of documents piled beside it. "They're destroying evidence," Greer said, but Deputy Collins held up a hand. "We can't interrupt. That would be interference, but we can document that we witnessed it in progress." Maribel kept her commentary professional as she filmed. "We are observing what appears to be active document destruction in the facility office at 9:47 p.m. As they rounded the corner into the final section, Greer's heart leaped. There, in a small crate partially hidden behind stacks of paperwork, was the calico kitten. Its large eyes blinked at them in the dim light. "There you are, little one," Greer breathed. She knelt slowly, assessing the kitten's condition. It looked afraid, but unharmed. Silas was immediately drawn to the papers stacked around the crate. These are copies of our clinic's vaccination certificates," he said, photographing page after page, "all with my stamp. But I never signed these. This is exactly what we needed. Proof of forgery." Greer began to slowly move the kitten's crate away from the papers, working carefully to avoid startling any of the dogs nearby. Years of experience guided her movements as she softly hummed to keep the animals calm. The dogs watched, but remained quiet, their earlier sedation working in the team's favor. Maribel kept her phone steady, capturing the systematic way they gathered evidence. "We have located multiple documents that appear to show irregularities in vaccination and breeding records," she narrated calmly. "All items are being photographed in place before being documented for proper chain of custody." The kitten mewed softly as Greer inched its crate toward a service door they'd identified as their exit point. Everything was going according to plan, better than they'd dared hope. They had solid evidence of medication misuse, untagged animals, falsified records, and proof of Vale's connection to the forged vaccination certificates. The livestream had been running smoothly for nearly 40 minutes, creating an undeniable public record of their findings. Silas finished photographing the last batch of documents, his movements precise and methodical. 2 decades of professional documentation habits served them well now, ensuring nothing could be dismissed as improperly handled evidence. Deputy Collins maintained her position near the main entrance, monitoring for any signs of activity from the main house. "Looking clear so far," she reported quietly. "But let's not push our luck." The enormity of what they'd discovered hung in the air, not just scattered violations, but systematic fraud and animal welfare issues. The evidence they'd gathered could shut down Vale's entire operation. For the first time since this started, they could see a path to justice, not just for Scout, but for every animal affected by Vale's schemes. "Almost there," Greer whispered as she maneuvered the kitten's crate the final few feet toward the door. The small calico watched her with those knowing eyes, almost seeming to understand the importance of staying quiet. Maribel kept her narration steady and factual. "We are now concluding our initial documentation of the facility. All evidence has been recorded with proper timestamps and location markers." Her followers' comments scrolled past rapidly, hundreds of witnesses to every discovery they'd made. For one brief, shining moment, it felt like a perfect operation. They had found exactly what they needed: proof of Vale's illegal activities, documentation of the forged records, and most importantly, they had located the kitten. The livestream had captured it all, preventing any possibility of a cover-up. Years of Greer's expertise with animals had kept the dogs calm and cooperative. Silas's meticulous evidence gathering would stand up to any scrutiny. All their planning and preparation had paid off. The kitten's crate was now positioned right beside the service door, ready for extraction. Greer felt her heart race with a mixture of relief and triumph. They had done it. They had actually done it. The harsh scrape of metal against metal shattered the quiet. Greer's heart leaped into her throat as she spun around to see Rafe Dawn emerging from the shadows, his face twisted in a cruel smile. He slammed the heavy barn doors shut with a resounding bang that made the horses whinny in their stalls. "No one's going anywhere," he growled, sliding thick metal bolts into place one by one. The sound of each lock clicking shut felt like a nail in Greer's coffin. She clutched the kitten's crate tighter to her chest, backing away as Rafe stalked forward. The small calico mewed pitifully inside, sensing the tension. Scout pressed against Greer's leg, a low rumble building in his chest. "Hand over that crate and maybe I'll let you walk out of here," Rafe said, his boots crunching on the hay-strewn floor. "Never," Greer shot back, though her voice shook. She glanced desperately at Silas, who had positioned himself between her and Rafe. "Then I guess we do this the hard way." Rafe's hand shot out, grabbing an old lantern from a hook on the wall. Before anyone could react, he kicked it viciously, sending it spinning through the air. The lantern crashed into a towering stack of hay bales, glass shattering and kerosene spraying. Flames erupted instantly, racing up the dry hay. "Nothing leaves this building!" Rafe bellowed, backing toward a side door only he seemed to know about. "Nothing and no one." "Greer, the gap!" Silas shouted, pointing to a narrow space between the barn boards where weather had warped the wood. "Get the kitten out." She didn't hesitate. Smoke was already beginning to fill the barn, making her eyes water as she rushed to the wall. The gap was barely wide enough, but she could see Maribel's worried face on the other side, phone still recording everything. "Take her!" Greer pushed the crate through the opening, feeling Maribel's hands grip it from the other side. The kitten would be safe, at least. A deep groan from above made her blood run cold. She looked up just as the roof began to sag, weakened by the rapidly spreading fire. Scout barked a warning, but it was too late. With a deafening crack, a massive wooden beam gave way. White-hot pain exploded through Greer's right leg as the beam crashed down, pinning her to the floor. She screamed, the sound lost in the roar of the flames and the panicked whinnying of horses. Smoke rolled across the ceiling in thick waves, beginning to sink lower and lower. "Greer!" Silas rushed to her side, already trying to lift the heavy beam. "Can you move your leg at all?" She tried, but even the slightest movement sent daggers of agony shooting up her thigh. "No," she gasped out between coughs. "It's stuck." Scout circled them anxiously, hackles raised as he watched the flames spread. But instead of trying to flee, he pressed close to Greer, tugging at her sleeve with gentle teeth. His message was clear. "Get up. We have to go." "Good boy," she wheezed, patting his head. "But you need to get out. Go with Silas." Scout's only response was to tug harder at her sleeve, refusing to leave her side. His loyalty made tears spring to her eyes. Or maybe that was just the smoke. "Breathe slow and low," Silas instructed, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. He braced his shoulder against the beam. "Try to stay calm. We'll get you out." Through the haze, Greer could see the neat rows of sedative bottles on a nearby shelf beginning to simmer in the heat. If those exploded? She didn't want to think about it. The dogs in their cages were whining now, adding to the chaos of sound and smoke. Outside, she could hear Maribel's voice, still narrating for the live stream. "The barn is on fire. Rafe Dawn deliberately set it ablaze. Greer's trapped inside with Dr. Kincaid and Scout. Someone call the fire department." The thick smoke was making it harder to breathe with each passing second. Greer's vision started to blur around the edges as her lungs screamed for clean air. What had started as a simple evidence-gathering mission had turned into a nightmare fight for survival. Scout pressed his wet nose against her cheek, whining softly. She wrapped her arms around his neck, drawing strength from his steady presence. "We're not done yet," she whispered. "We can't let them win." Silas grunted with effort as he strained against the beam. "When I lift, try to pull yourself free," he said. "Scout, stay close to her." "Ready." Greer nodded, though the movement made her dizzy. The smoke was getting thicker, darker, deadlier. She could feel consciousness starting to slip away despite her best efforts to stay alert. But she had to hold on. They had come too far to give up now. The beam shifted slightly as Silas threw his whole weight against it. Pain lanced through Greer's leg, but she grit her teeth and tried to pull herself forward. Scout grabbed her sleeve again, trying to help drag her to safety. Time seemed to slow down, marked only by the crackle of flames and their desperate gasps for air. The live stream was still running, capturing every terrible moment, proof of Vale's willingness to destroy evidence and lives alike. But right now, Greer couldn't think about justice or expose or anything except the next breath, and the next, and the next. The distant wail of sirens pierced through the crackling flames and thick smoke. Time seemed to stretch like taffy as Greer struggled to breathe, her leg still painfully trapped beneath the heavy beam. The heat pressed in from all sides, making each breath more precious than the last. Silas's voice cut through the chaos with practiced authority. "Listen to my voice, both of you," he commanded, dropping seamlessly into the familiar anchor cadence he'd developed years ago. Short count, steady breath. In 2-3, out-2-3. Scout's ears perked up at the familiar rhythm, his body automatically syncing to the calming pattern. Greer forced herself to focus on Silas's voice, fighting against the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. The methodical breathing helped clear her head just enough to stay conscious. "Again," Silas instructed, his own breath matching the cadence. "In 2-3, out-2-3. Scout planted his paws more firmly against the beam, muscles trembling with effort. On Silas's next count, the loyal dog heaved with renewed determination. The beam shifted slightly. Not much, but enough to create a fraction more space. "That's it, Scout," Silas encouraged, never breaking the breathing pattern. "Greer, stay with us. In 2-3. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the barn as the deputy and first responders breached a side door, tools making quick work of the locked entrance. Fresh air rushed in, feeding the flames but also providing precious oxygen to the trapped group. "Over here!" Silas called out, his voice hoarse from smoke. "We need help with this beam." Scout refused to leave Greer's side, still pushing against the heavy wood even as firefighters rushed forward. Together with Silas and Scout, they managed to lift the beam just enough for Greer to slide free. Her leg was badly bruised, but thankfully not broken. As flames surged up the walls behind them, Silas and Scout practically carried Greer between them toward the exit. The heat chased at their heels as they stumbled into the cool night air, coughing and gasping. Outside, the scene was chaos of a different kind. Maribel stood steady, her phone held high as she continued streaming everything. Through the device's screen, she captured Loretta Vale in a moment of complete unraveling. "Get rid of those files!" Vale screamed at her staff, her carefully maintained composure shattered. Her designer outfit was disheveled, her face contorted with panic as she gestured wildly toward a nearby outbuilding. "Everything in the office! Destroy it all! Now!" Several stable hands hesitated, looking uncertainly between their boss and the growing number of law enforcement vehicles arriving on scene. "Did you hear me?" Vale shrieked, her voice cracking. "Those records cannot be found." "Shred everything." Maribel zoomed in on Vale's face as she continued her incriminating tirade, making sure to capture every damning word. The livestream's comment section exploded with viewers witnessing Vale's inadvertent confession in real time. Rafe, who had been lurking near the edge of the chaos, took one look at the arriving deputies and bolted. He sprinted toward the tree line, disappearing into the darkness before anyone could stop him. His escape only added to Vale's visible breakdown. "This is all a mistake." Vale tried to backtrack, finally noticing Maribel's phone. Her attempt at regaining control came far too late. "I simply meant to preserve client privacy in this unfortunate situation." "Mrs. Vale," the deputy interrupted firmly, "I'm ordering these grounds secured as a crime scene. No one leaves, and nothing gets destroyed." He turned to his colleagues, who were already spreading out across the property. "Set up a perimeter and start documenting everything." Greer sat on the back step of an ambulance, finally allowing herself to breathe normally as paramedics checked her vital signs and examined her injured leg. The calico kitten was curled in her arms, trembling but unharmed. Scout stayed pressed against her side, his watchful gaze never leaving her face. Silas approached with paperwork in his shaking hands, accompanied by the deputy. Despite his obvious exhaustion, Silas's expression was determined as he signed his name on an emergency custody affidavit. "This grants temporary custody of both Scout and the kitten to you and the clinic," the deputy explained, countersigning the document. "They'll be held as evidence in this case, but under your direct care pending the investigation and any resulting charges." "Thank you," Silas managed, his voice rough from smoke exposure. He watched as evidence technicians photographed and catalogued items being brought out of the buildings that weren't affected by the fire. "What happens now?" "Now we process this scene properly," the deputy replied, his tone grim but satisfied. "Between the livestream footage, witness statements, and whatever evidence survives that fire, Mrs. Vale has some serious explaining to do." Through the smoke-tinged air, Greer watched as Vale was read her rights. The woman's previous aristocratic bearing completely crumbled. The breeder's perfectly manicured hands shook as she was escorted to a patrol car, her protests falling on deaf ears. Paramedics insisted on taking Greer to the hospital to properly examine her leg and check for smoke inhalation. As they helped her onto a gurney, Scout whined anxiously. "He can ride with us," one paramedic offered, noting the dog's obvious distress at potentially being separated from Greer, "as long as he stays calm." "He will," Greer assured them, patting the seat beside her. Scout hopped up immediately, settling into his now familiar anchor breathing pattern. The kitten remained curled against Greer's chest, purring softly. Silas stepped forward before they closed the ambulance doors. "I'll meet you at the hospital after I finish giving my statement," he promised. "And Greer, thank you for making me see what needed to be done." Greer managed a tired smile. "Thanks, Scout," she replied. "He's the one who showed us all the truth." As the ambulance pulled away, Maribel continued recording, her live stream capturing the aftermath of Vale's empire crumbling. Fire crews worked to contain the barn blaze while law enforcement methodically documented everything. The night's events had exposed years of carefully hidden cruelty and fraud, all because one loyal dog refused to give up on protecting those he loved. The camera panned across the scene one final time, Vale in custody, evidence being collected, and justice finally being served. The truth could no longer be hidden behind wealth and influence. Thanks to Scout's unwavering heart, Greer's determination, and Silas's choice to finally stand up for what was right, the long shadow of Vale's corruption was being brought into the light. The fluorescent lights of the veterinary clinic buzzed overhead as Silas Kincaid strode purposefully through the front doors, his tablet displaying the damning live stream footage. Behind him, emergency personnel continued treating smoke inhalation victims in the parking lot. The normally pristine waiting room now bustled with police officers taking statements, their radios crackling with updates. County Director Lowell Pierce stood near the reception desk, his usual bureaucratic composure notably ruffled. His tie hung loose, and his balding head glistened with nervous sweat as he watched the video evidence play out on Silas's screen. "This live stream has over 10,000 views already," Silas said firmly, turning up the volume so Pierce could clearly hear Vale's incriminating words about destroying files. "And these forged vaccination certificates with my clinic's stamp, used without authorization, show a clear pattern of fraud." Pierce's face grew increasingly pale as he watched the barn fire unfold on screen, Vale's unhinged screaming providing an unmistakable admission of guilt. He tugged at his collar, clearly uncomfortable. "The evidence is irrefutable," Silas continued, laying out printed copies of the falsified documents. "Vale's operation was built on fraud, animal cruelty, and now attempted murder through arson. Scout was never dangerous. He was protecting my daughter Tamsin when she discovered Vale's illegal activities." Outside in the ambulance bay, paramedics were still treating Greer for smoke inhalation and minor burns. Through the window, Silas could see her sitting on a gurney, oxygen mask covering her face, but determination still burning in her eyes. She had refused transport to the hospital, insisting on staying close to Scout and the kitten. Pierce cleared his throat awkwardly. "This is considerably more serious than initially presented." He pulled out his phone, fingers trembling slightly as he typed. "I'm withdrawing the euthanasia order for Scout effective immediately, and I'm initiating a full investigation into Vale Kennels." "That's a start," Silas nodded grimly. "But there need to be consequences for everyone involved in this cover-up." As if on cue, 2 police detectives entered the clinic, their badges gleaming under the harsh lighting. "We're here about the Vale case," the senior detective announced. "We have arrest warrants for Loretta Vale and Rafe Dawn on multiple charges: animal cruelty, fraud, attempted murder, and arson." Pierce seemed to deflate further with each charge listed. His carefully constructed world of efficient paperwork and donor appeasement was crumbling before his eyes. In the treatment area, Scout lay on a thick blanket, still coughing occasionally from smoke exposure, but stable according to his vital signs. The little calico kitten was curled up against his chest, just as she had been during their first meeting in the exam room. Despite everything they'd been through, Scout's protective instinct remained unchanged, a guardian angel in dog form. Maribel sat nearby with a laptop, methodically typing up witness statements while keeping a watchful eye on her charges. Her normally cheerful face was drawn with fatigue, but there was satisfaction in her eyes as she documented the truth that could no longer be denied. "I'll need statements from everyone," one of the detectives said, pulling out a notepad. "Starting with Dr. Kincaid." Silas nodded wearily. "Let me get something first." He went to his office and returned with a formal letter, freshly printed. "This is my official retraction of any past endorsements of Vale Kennels. I take full responsibility for not monitoring the use of my clinic's certification stamp more carefully." He handed copies to both the detective and Pierce. The detective read it quickly and tucked it into his case file. "This will help establish the timeline of fraud. We'll need to document all instances of the forged certificates." Pierce was reading his copy with a pained expression. His carefully maintained system of expedient solutions and donor influence was exposed as deeply flawed. I should have investigated more thoroughly when concerns were first raised," he admitted quietly. Through the window to the treatment area, they could see Greer had finally made her way back inside. She moved slowly, still favoring her injured leg, but her face showed immense relief as she sank into a chair near Scout and the kitten. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to truly exhale. The detective's radio crackled. "Vale is in custody," a voice reported. "Picked her up trying to board a private plane at the regional airport. Dawn's vehicle was spotted heading east on the interstate. State police are in pursuit." Silas felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The truth had finally surfaced, and those responsible would face justice. He watched Scout gently nuzzle the kitten, maintaining his ritual of protection even through his own discomfort. The dog who had been wrongly labeled as dangerous was now living proof of loyalty and sacrifice. "We'll need to process this scene," the detective said, gesturing to the medical records room, "and we'll want copies of all documentation related to Vale Kennels." Maribel looked up from her laptop. "I've organized everything chronologically," she said, "including screenshots from the live stream and photos of the forged certificates. We have a clear paper trail showing the pattern of abuse and fraud." Pierce shifted uncomfortably. "I'll have my office cooperate fully with the investigation," he said, straightening his tie in a nervous gesture. "All county records will be made available." The institutional machinery that had nearly caused Scout's death was now turning to serve justice instead. The false narrative of a dangerous dog had collapsed under the weight of evidence, replaced by the truth of corruption and cruelty exposed. Silas walked over to check on Scout, placing a gentle hand on the dog's head. Scout's tail thumped weakly against the blanket, still managing to show joy despite his ordeal. The kitten purred contentedly, both animals finding comfort in their unlikely bond. "You did good," Silas murmured to them both. "You helped bring everything into the light." Greer reached out to scratch Scout's ears. "We all did," she said softly. "Together." Her voice was hoarse from smoke, but her eyes shone with triumph. The clinic buzzed with activity as police photographers documented evidence and officers took statements. But in the treatment area, a small island of peace existed where Scout and his kitten rested, their simple truth about loyalty and protection speaking louder than any testimony. The moral ledger had finally tilted toward justice. Those who had preyed on innocent animals were cornered, their schemes exposed. Lives that had hung in the balance, both animal and human, were safe for the moment. Pierce's capitulation marked a turning point where institutional power bowed to truth rather than influence. Silas watched the scene unfold with a complex mix of emotions: relief at the victory, regret for his past compromises, hope for reconciliation with Tamsin. But mostly he felt profound gratitude for the courage of those who had refused to back down: Greer, Maribel, and most of all, Scout himself. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, touching Scout's grey muzzle with gold. The old dog's breathing had settled into a steady rhythm, matched by the kitten's gentle purring. They were safe now, their ordeal transforming from a tale of danger to one of justice served and truth revealed. 3 days after the fire, the autumn morning dawned crisp and clear over the veterinary clinic. Greer sat cross-legged on the floor of Scout's recovery room, her scrubs wrinkled from another overnight vigil. The brave dog's breathing had grown more laboured through the night, each breath a visible struggle despite the oxygen support. The little calico kitten hadn't left Scout's side, maintaining a gentle purr against his chest that seemed to bring him comfort. Greer watched them through tears she couldn't hold back anymore, knowing in her heart that Scout's damaged lungs were finally failing. The smoke exposure had been too severe. "Hey, buddy," she whispered, running her fingers through his grey-flecked fur. "You're the best boy. Such a good, brave boy." Scout's tail thumped weakly against the blanket at her words. Even now, he tried to comfort her. The morning light streaming through the window caught the silver in his muzzle, highlighting the gentle wisdom in his eyes. Dr. Silas Kincaid appeared in the doorway, his face drawn with exhaustion and grief. He'd been monitoring Scout's declining vitals all night, hoping against hope for a turnaround that deep down they knew wouldn't come. "His oxygen levels are dropping," he said softly. "He's fighting hard, but—" "I know." Greer nodded, her voice breaking. "He saved my life. He saved all those other dogs. And now—" The kitten stretched up to touch her nose to Scout's muzzle, still purring. Scout managed a tiny lick in return, his breathing growing more shallow. "Let him know it's okay," Silas suggested gently, kneeling beside them. "He's held on so long, making sure everyone else was safe first." That's who he always was. Greer gathered Scout's head into her lap, cradling him close as his breaths came in shorter gasps. The kitten settled against his chest, that soothing purr never faltering. "Rest now, sweet boy," Greer whispered. "You did so good. You can rest now." Scout's eyes found hers one last time, full of love and trust. His tail thumped once more, then stilled. With a soft sigh, he relaxed in her arms as his spirit slipped peacefully away, the kitten's purr accompanying him to the end. Greer broke down sobbing, holding Scout's still form while Silas rested a comforting hand on her shoulder. They sat together in silence for a long while, honoring the passing of a true hero. Later that afternoon, they laid Scout to rest in a quiet corner of the clinic's memorial garden. Silas had a simple but beautiful stone marker made, engraved with the words, "Scout, beloved friend, protector, hero." The following morning, as mist still clung to the trees, Silas stood alone by Scout's fresh grave. The sound of footsteps on the dewy grass made him turn. A young woman emerged from the tree line, Tamsin, his daughter, finally coming home. She looked older than he remembered, her face bearing the weight of all she'd witnessed and fought against. They stared at each other across Scout's marker, years of pain and silence between them. "I'm so sorry," Silas said, his voice rough with emotion. "I should have listened. Should have believed you when you tried to expose Vale's operation. My silence, my dedication to policy over what was right. It cost so much. Cost you so much." "Dad." Tamsin's voice wavered. "No, let me finish." He continued. "I was wrong. Dead wrong. I let my fear of rocking the boat, of losing status in the community, stop me from standing up for what mattered. I failed you. Failed Scout. Failed every animal that suffered while I looked the other way." Tamsin took a step closer, tears streaming down her face. "You're here now. You helped bring them down in the end. Because of you," he said. "You never stopped fighting. You left those breadcrumbs, Scout, the kitten, knowing someone would eventually follow them to the truth. You were so much braver than I ever was." "I learned that from you, actually," Tamsin said softly. "The old you, who taught me to always protect those who couldn't protect themselves. That's the father I knew was still in there somewhere." Silas's composure cracked. He reached for his daughter with trembling hands. She flew into his embrace, both of them crying as they held each other for the first time in years. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I love you so much. Please forgive me." "I love you too, Dad," she whispered back. "We can rebuild from here, make things right." They stood together by Scout's marker, choosing healing over hurt, choosing to move forward together. Inside the clinic, Greer was putting the finishing touches on the adoption paperwork for the little calico kitten. She'd named her Hope. It seemed fitting given everything they'd been through. The kitten sat perched on her shoulder, overseeing the proceedings with typical feline authority. Silas found them there after his reconciliation with Tamsin. His eyes were red, but his smile was genuine as he watched Hope headbutt Greer's cheek. "I have a proposition for you," he said, pulling up a chair. "We need to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. No more animals falling through the cracks, no more looking the other way. I want to start a new program here. Evidence-based rescue work focused on prevention and accountability, and I want you to help lead it." Greer looked up in surprise. "Me? But I'm just a tech." "You're the one who saw the truth about Scout when everyone else had written him off," Silas said firmly. "You fought for him, gathered evidence, kept detailed records." "That's exactly the kind of dedication and attention to detail this program needs. We'll work with law enforcement, other clinics, rescue groups, create a network focused on preventing abuse and ensuring proper care. What do you say?" Greer felt tears well up again. Happy ones this time. "Yes, absolutely, yes." A week later, they gathered in the clinic's main lobby for a special ceremony. A beautiful bronze plaque now hung on the wall, commemorating Scout's heroism and sacrifice. The inscription read, "In loving memory of Scout, whose courage and loyalty saved many lives and exposed great wrongs, may his story remind us to always protect the vulnerable and fight for justice. His spirit lives on in the work we do here." Tamsin stepped out of the tree line behind the clinic, making her way to where Silas stood studying the plaque. She slipped her hand into his, squeezing gently. Greer joined them, Hope purring contentedly on her shoulder as always. They stood together, united in their commitment to honor Scout's legacy by creating real change. The system that had once failed so many would become a force for protection and justice. Scout's final gift had been bringing them all together for this new beginning. Through the window, the morning sun caught the bronze plaque, making it gleam like a beacon of hope. In that quiet moment, they could almost feel Scout's presence, his gentle spirit watching over them as they carried his mission forward. The little calico kitten stretched up on Greer's shoulder, reaching one paw toward the plaque as if in blessing. Her purr grew louder, filling the silence with promise. This was how it should be, not an ending, but a beginning. Scout's courage had lit the way forward. Now it was up to them to walk that path, to protect those who needed protection, to speak for those who had no voice. Together they would build something better, something worthy of the brave dog who had brought them all together. Scout's legacy would live on in every animal they saved, every wrong they made right, every life they touched. The plaque caught the light again, Scout's name shining bright. And in that moment, they knew. This was exactly where they were meant to be, doing exactly what they were meant to do. Hope purred her agreement. Scout's spirit lived on through her, through all of them. The work ahead would be challenging, but they would face it together, guided by love, justice, and the memory of a hero who had shown them the way. As the morning light filled the lobby, Silas, Tamsin, and Greer stood united before Scout's memorial, ready to begin their new mission. The system that had once enabled suffering would now protect the vulnerable. Scout's sacrifice had made it possible. His love had made it inevitable. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.